Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Jim Pinto of Postworld Games to talk about his new Kickstarter, Bloodwraith. So, Jim, why don't you just tell us about yourself and then tell us about the Kickstarter first?
I think it's funny that I always get identified as Jim Pinto from Postworld Games. I've been in the industry 20 plus years, and Postworld Games is almost a pride project. I barely make any money doing it.
But that's what you're doing now, right? Like that's like it seems to be your focus.
It is. But to say I'm from there always feels funny to me because
how would you prefer
I don't
to be
identify
introduced?
myself that way. But
what would be your preferred introduction?
I don't know. I don't have an answer.
We'll just call you Jim.
Yeah, Jim. I have Jim on the line. Jim who?
So
I think I like it better that way because I'm sort of one of those guys that just wants to be forgotten when this is all over. I don't really want a legacy or anything. I didn't get into this for the fame, which is shocking because when I was, I think it was about second grade, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer in second grade because I wanted to be famous. That's the only reason I wanted to be a writer. But now that I've been doing this, I really don't like any kind of attention or adulation or anything.
Now, okay, so you just don't. It makes you uncomfortable, or is it just
it
the
makes
present?
me really uncomfortable.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess writing and making games are slightly different too. Like if you were focusing mainly on novels or something, would you still feel the same way, or is it because it's RPGs that you don't?
I don't do novels for that reason. I've written a novel. It's out there, and the work you have to do to self-promote with novels is even worse than gaming. And so it's the reason I do gaming instead of novels.
Okay.
And I also don't really like telling people this is the only story you can tell. The book I just wrote is the only way to view this material. So you have to read my ideas behind it, and this is the only way to see Conan. This is the only way to see this fantasy world. And that bugs me. So that's another reason I don't write novels. But
that seems like a hard problem to get around. Like I guess there's maybe an untapped or an unexplored novel structure that you could create to answer that problem. But I mean that seems inherent to stories is the limited nature that they have.
I guess that is inherently part of the process, but it just annoys me, this authority that somebody comes to with a novel, the idea that my view is the only view and this is the only way you can view this story. Every time I watch something that's good, I think to myself, I would have done this at this point in the story. I would rather see this right now. I'm watching Sacred Games right now on Netflix, and it's an Indian movie series. Not a movie series, but a TV series. It's just a long story, and there's tons of points in it, which I said, well, they really should have hit the emotional beat harder here. They should be taking their time here. This scene didn't breathe enough. And I find myself rewriting it as I'm watching it, and then that makes me want to write a game. That's usually where the idea for a game comes from, is because I'm watching this, and they're not doing a good job telling their story. Why can't we as gamers tell their story better for them?
Well, and that seems to be a lot of what you do, and a lot of your approach seems to be coming from that kind of criticism of you seeing something that you don't like the way it was done, so you want to do it better. Do you find that you're able to apply that kind of criticism to your own work? Like I can watch a movie and see where all the beats are wrong, but then I find it much harder to take that level of criticism to my own work because I'm maybe a little bit blinded by, I can't see the forest from the trees.
Right. That's certainly the hardest part. I turn to people a lot for critiques, and I like honest criticism. If you see me online, I'm always honest about my feedback about things, what I don't like and what I do like, and people will call that hate, and I don't see that as hate. I think if you love something enough to give feedback about it because you want to see it better, that's the opposite of hate. Criticism is the lifeblood of making art better. I know when something I've made really, really sucks. Mm-hmm. I can't tell when it's done. That's my weakness as a writer. I don't know when I should just stop typing or when I should stop laying out, when I should stop ordering art, because these elements, I'm so ingrained and so deeply involved with the elements, I can't I can't really tell if I'm done. I can tell if it's good or if it's bad, but I can't tell if it's done.
I think
Bloodwraith started because I bought a PDF online that was absolute garbage, and I said, if somebody wrote this and is selling it for $5, what can I do for $5?
Well, I think most people have that problem, but go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so can you talk a bit about Bloodwraith? So I mean, we don't have to mention the specific game, obviously, but it came exactly like we were saying, from something you didn't like, and you wanted to do something better. So what is it that it does that's better?
Well, for the PDF, honestly, I don't remember how long it was. I want to say about 40 pages. Mm-hmm. It was $5. It had rave reviews, and I won't name who it is. I think that's unprofessional, but I just thought it was hot garbage. There were 3 useful pages in there. Most of the time, the writer just phoned it in, just said, "Oh, just use the stats from this for this thing. Just use the stats for this thing." And I said, I can do so much better with something. If this is all it takes to sell an OSR product, and I don't write OSR. I haven't written anything for OSR since World's Largest Dungeon, if you want to call that OSR. And so I just sat down and started typing, and I turned to Darren Pierce. I said, give me a name. Give me a title for something, a location, a place, a world. I don't care. Just give me a name. I want to start with something. And he came up with something. I don't remember the first word, but the second word was blood marshes. And I didn't like the first word. I thought it was a little tiresome. So I came up with votive blood marshes, which is what got me started writing. And then within a day, I hated it. I said, that's a horrible title. Nobody's going to get what votive blood marshes means. It's not as evocative as I like. And so I said, well, I've got these blood wraiths in here I've already created. I'll just call it Bloodwraith. It just seemed the right way to go. And I'd already made the logo. I was already, I don't know, I want to say about 30 pages in, and within the first day of just notes and ideas. And I just started writing. And within 8 days, I had finished the world book, the first world book for Bloodwraith. And then I was talking to Alan Barr, and I said, well, why don't I write a system for it too? And so that's at about 60 pages now, and that's almost done. I'm still writing the monster stats. And then I said, well, I hate the magic system, the generic magic system of magic missile and fireball and lightning bolt. Let me make up new magic systems too. And so all new spells people are going to see in the book, and I decided to just do a whole book of just magic as well. So before I knew it, my review of this awful PDF turned into 4 weeks of work for me.
Okay. Now, so in terms of system, is this how much of this is sort of traditional OSR system, and how much of it is new things that you've created?
It's mostly OSR system. What I did is I took the Blood and Coin rules and I completely edited them and revamped them, cleaned them up. I took some of my ideas about how I think damage should be done. That's in there. I'm going to be adding rules. I'm adding rules for relationships and for people having flashbacks, because life in the world is hard and people have been tormented by the death of the gods in the setting. And so I've created rules for how flashbacks affect the characters. And I've also started to address how to build your community and what your role in the community is. So these things are very different from a traditional D&D game where you just roll up some stats, buy some gear, and then go kill some monsters. And so since you're playing a different game, I wanted the game to play differently. Okay, if that makes sense.
No, because you mentioned specifically that it. I think in the Kickstarter page it says that it's not really focused on things like dungeons. It's focused more on it's like protecting the community and that sort of thing.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, is it more dramatically focused, or is it more focused on, I don't know, what the surface level exploration rather than subterranean exploration? Like, how would you describe the expected adventuring style?
Well, there's some GM advice on how people should be handling that, but because it's an OSR product, I still think you provide a tool and you let people just go.
Okay.
What made the Red Book so good was that there wasn't a lot of hand holding, and you just sort of learned through practice how to get good at that. And so everybody's got their own style already. People that play these kinds of games, they know what they want. They know what they want to do. So my expectation, is that you're going to be working in the village. You're going to be protecting the village. Every once in a while, one of the adventures, I'm writing some PDF adventures to go with it, very short.
Mm-hmm.
But one of them, you capture an elf who has been attacking the community. And from right there, from that moment, I don't think I've seen that in a published book before. How the PCs choose to proceed with that elf will determine how the adventure goes. I can't write a by-the-nose adventure that tells you what to do from that point. Here's what the elf knows. Here's why they've attacked. Go. That's it. The GM at that point has to make 100 decisions that a game master would not necessarily have to make if they were playing the B2 module.
Yep. But sometimes that's that can often be a very good starting point for a low prep session. Like if you have like a really cool scenario that sort of is a catalyst, but you really need to see how the players react.
Right.
You can't write it out. So, you might have other details that are fleshed out, like where the person came from or things like that, but you can't really anticipate it. So I think that makes sense. What I was also thinking of when I saw that on the Kickstarter page was, a lot of my old D&D adventures when I first started, and even now as an adult, what they, there may be the GM may want us to go to a dungeon or do something, but a lot of it ends up being a little more Knights of the Dinner Table in where it ends up, in terms of the players just want to set up shop in town and do something, and they develop bonds that are important to them, and if the GM just kind of rolls with it, it can go somewhere interesting. I don't know if that's what you were intending there, but that was sort of the style of play that leapt to mind for me when I was reading through the material.
The characters certainly won't be meeting a lot of strangers because of the structure of the setting. They're going to know the people in their enclave. They're going to be important people in their community. So they should be building bonds, but they won't be building bonds with a stranger. Okay. They won't be going to an inn, and there's no taverns, right? The setting doesn't allow for that. If you want to put it in there, that's up to you. I'm not going to stop anybody, but that's not the point of the game. And so I wanted to create something, or I wanted at least to make something that felt challenging and different, rather than, okay, here's my version of Forgotten Realms, but without the black elves or the dark elves.
And the setting is kind of like a post-apocalyptic style of fantasy.
A little bit, yeah, which tends to be something that I gravitate towards, hence the name of the company. I really like settings where the characters have to think and not let their equipment and their character sheets solve problems for them. I want them to do the problem solving.
Okay, that's very OSR. I think that's a very sort of that's how. So it's sort of, I call it the difference between, am I simulating a Sherlock Holmes story or am I Sherlock Holmes? It's that kind of a
right.
And so you're saying you want the players to be Sherlock Holmes. You want them to solve the puzzles themselves.
Yeah, certainly. I don't even have an equipment list in the book, which I think is going to scare a lot of people. That there's no gold pieces, there's no charts for equipment. Your character class tells you how much stuff you get.
Okay, that can work.
It better.
Well, I mean, I recently did it. I went from doing one game where I had this massive equipment list, and then I decided to strip everything down in the next one I made, and like it sometimes by taking the equipment list and reducing it, you actually create more equipment in the setting. Do you know what I mean? Like, because then people realize, oh, everything actually exists. It's not just what's on this one equipment list page.
Right, exactly.
So
yeah, I mean, I've written the toolbox. I've written the ultimate toolbox. I wrote D20 Mercenaries. I love charts. I'm not trying to avoid doing work by getting rid of equipment lists. But I wanted exactly that. I wanted people to be able to go, oh, you know what I want? I want a bag full of glowing marbles.
Okay.
And I wanted them to say, I want that on my equipment list. Okay, you have glowing marbles on your... And if I'd put that on an equipment list, everybody would purchase it. But if you don't put it on an equipment list, it's only going to end up in the hands of somebody that thinks of it.
Yeah, I found exactly the same thing. Like the guy who suddenly wants to be a coffee merchant will ask about coffee. The guy, it's that sort of thing. I heard you say something about design, I think on the podcast with Richard, which I'll put a link to below. But you had mentioned something about your approach to design and something about how you put. I think you put. It's connected to the thought that where you were talking about how you didn't like that people had just kind of put the stat for this or the stat for that in the book. That it seems like you put a considerable amount of thought into when you do have stats, that you put more thought into them. And I was curious about that, and I was curious about your approach to design in general.
I think that's a big question. I think that design's sort of personal. The role of design is for me to solve problems. I have to make decisions when I'm making a thing. And so if I make something that completely replaces your thought as a game master or player, then why am I making it? Why aren't I just sitting down and writing a novel like we talked about at the beginning of this? Why aren't I just writing a movie script? Because if I'm just going to replace your thought process anyway, there's just so many bad board games and role-playing games and card games out there where the people aren't making any decisions. And so my job as a designer is to create things that force you to make better decisions or tougher decisions. It's why I designed Praxis and Protocol the way I did, which are very far removed from the OSR movement. They're more of my indie design style. But I always go into anything thinking, how do I challenge the reader in a way that they haven't been challenged before? Because there's all kinds of stuff, and I don't know everybody making OSR product right now. I think there's 500 companies doing it, but
there's a lot.
I look at some things sometimes, and I just think, what was going on in your brain, you Mr. Designer or Mrs. Designer, that you thought you needed to make this product? What did you think was missing in the environment that we needed a book about a tavern run by a lizard man?
Okay, I imagine the answer to that would probably be that people who want to just have something they can grab and put into their campaign on the fly is who they're going for.
Right, but how many people? If you're doing that to satisfy a consumer, then you're not doing any design work. You're not actually creating anything. You're letting your pretense or your expectation of what you think people are expecting, which is a meta point of view that you don't even want to get stuck in. As soon as you start thinking that way, well, what do people really want? You're not making anything anymore. You're not even a game writer anymore. You're just regurgitating some ideas that aren't even yours. That's boring to me.
So is your answer to that to make what you want, or is it more than that?
Yeah. The number one thing I do is make what I want. I think that's what drives post-world games. I can't sit down and make something I don't like. I started working on something the other day. I was tired and I didn't even want to do it. It was a logo, and I realized I hate this name. I hate this logo. I hate what I'm doing. This isn't going to come out. This isn't going to come out right. Nobody's going to like this thing that I'm making. So I had to just put it down and either rethink it, the name of it, or decide if I even wanted to do it. Because if I hate the logo, I'm certainly not going to have fun writing the rest of this stupid PDF. So yeah, you have to love what you're doing. Otherwise it's going to smell of, well, Vampire 5th edition, right? You can tell nobody loved working on that project. That's the number one thing that reeks from that project when I look at it, is nobody had fun working on this.
And I'm actually not very familiar with 5th edition Vampire, so
it just came out, right? So it's the PDF is out there. I've only glimpsed at it. I'm reading all these reviews. I'm glimpsing at what's going on, and they can make whatever decisions they want, right? From my perspective, it just looks like nobody had fun.
Okay. I haven't seen it, so I don't know, but I think I do take your point about that, which is if you're not personally interested in what you're making, it's not going to come out as good as what you seem to be saying.
Right.
So, but one thing I wanted to circle back to was you had mentioned that you wanted your games to force people to think differently or challenge their thinking. How does that, and maybe you answered it and I didn't catch it, but how does that pertain to Bloodwraith? Like, what does that do that forces people to think differently?
It's an OSR game that completely pulls you out of all of the safety nets that you're used to. You're not meeting at a tavern to go get a map from a wizard. You're not going into a dungeon to kill dragons and orcs and goblins. Elves and dwarves are your enemy. you are on the run, you are being hunted. All of these things pull you out of the comfort zone of what you're used to an OSR product doing. So I don't know if people are going to play it. I can't speak to that. I do know when they do sit down and read it, or they do sit down and play it, or they do make a character for it, their brain is going to start doing different things because they're worried about different things with this character. They know that their enclave has to move a lot and that they're being hunted. So how do you make a character differently when you know those facts about the setting versus, okay, guys, we're making a new D&D campaign. Make up some characters.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess what I'm anticipating people would probably say to that is that the strength of the OSR is the reliable nature of some of its features, like dungeons and things like that. So, what would do you think that this is going to be enough? Like, is it? Do you think where they will end up on the other side of it will be sufficient to give the long-term play that people come to usually for the OSR? Like, is there a I don't know how to put this. Is there a destination beyond that stuff, with this system?
Well, I would hope that there's in the setting there's 13 different Bloodwraiths, and they're all broken down in the book. It tells you who they are, and because they all have different personalities. They all have different expectations. I can't imagine the PCs ever fighting more than one of these.
Okay.
They're just that vile and deadly and whatnot. So they're an end of the campaign kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If the game master and the players decide that they want to play it, and it's only a 10-level OSR, it's not a 20-level OSR.
Okay.
If they decide they want to play through all 10 levels and really tell a meaty story with this, I assume they're going to want to kill one of the Bloodwraiths. I assume that they're going to want their enclave to make a difference by taking the war back to the Bloodwraiths, which allows them to do all kinds of the more weird Temple of Elemental Evil style adventuring, where you have to go to another plane, where you have to encounter a host of things that don't seem to make a lot of sense. The setting itself allows the game masters to pull all those incongruous elements that made the ancient version of D&D so interesting to us. So you're not fighting orcs and elves and dwarves all the time. There's lots of other kinds of villains in the setting, and I'm not trying to I don't like giving away too much.
Yep.
I want people to be surprised by the
I understand, because you want the players to not be not be informed about certain aspects of the game before they actually play it. So it's
right. Yeah, exactly. They should definitely be surprised by some of the things that I'm talking about. The fact that there's 13 Bloodwraiths is not. I'm not ruining anything there, but there's lots of mystery going on in the background of this setting that I want the game master to be able to stitch together too and do some work, because that's half the fun of game mastering. If I tell you A, B, and C are A, B, and C, and this is how they interlock, then there's no work for you as the game master to do, and you don't get to have that epiphany that happens when you go, oh, I can do this with the campaign. I like that aha moment for the other person, and I design with that in mind.
Okay. Now, in terms of the world building, the one thing that I found interesting about it was the way that you introduced things like demi-humans and like elves and dwarves and stuff like that. It seems like they're part of the apocalypse, right? Like there was this blood rain that seemed to initiate. Number one, I wanted to know if that was a Slayer reference. That was just a personal question of mine. But number two, I wanted to know if was
that a what reference?
A Slayer reference, the raining blood.
I'm a huge fan of Slayer. It's probably in the back of my mind with all the other pop culture that's there waiting for me to introduce it, but I didn't do it directly.
Okay, no, I was just curious. But
yeah.
But beyond that, that was an interesting concept, and I thought maybe if you could talk about that a little bit.
I have a game coming that will also be fantasy later called Banshee, or Banshee, depending on how you pronounce it. And it is based around the idea that humanity is a curse on all the other races. And so here I wanted to do the sort of, not necessarily the opposite, but I was sort of hearkening back to something that was already in my brain about how humanity was once this harmonious, great thing, and they let these other elements from outside of their protective fold change how they live. And so the harmony is gone from humanity because, one, the gods are dead, but two, they haven't found a way to interact and work with what's around them, with the nature around them. And you could look at that and say, Jesus, that's a really heavy-handed metaphor. My intention wasn't to be heavy-handed with it. It was just, here I was writing in the middle of the night as fast as I could when I started working on this. So going back now that I've had a chance to go back and the material's done and I can go and edit and massage it and whatnot, I just like the idea of pulling the rug out a little bit so that something as simple as the safety net of knowing elves are aloof or elves are immortal isn't there anymore. These elves are different. They're not going to get along with the humans, and they have different wants. And if I don't make a decision like that when I'm designing, I don't feel like I'm designing.
Okay. So I just like the idea of it seemed like they're a product of the apocalypse. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
That's the part that seemed like a really unusual twist to me. I don't think I've encountered that before. Maybe it exists somewhere. I don't know, but that seemed quite new and interesting to me. And so I'm also curious what kinds of movies and other media, books, things like that. What like inspires your writing? Where do you, I know you watch a lot of Indian movies because I see that on your Facebook feed, but I'm assuming there's other things that and I think you have an interest in anthropology from what I've been able to gather.
Yeah, I have a degree in anthropology.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. And well, let me ask you about that first, because that's something when I meet people who know about anthropology, I kind of think of like how someone like George Lucas might world build, or how world building occurs in something like Star Trek, where there seems to be a methodology behind it, if that makes sense. And I'm curious if that affects how you create cultures and how you.
Yeah, it totally does. It actually limits what I can do. When I came up with Black Monk, for instance, just a few years ago, it was so far outside of my tool shed and my comfort zone that I had to really shut all that down while I was writing. I had to look at the way Gaiman would write Sandman, which did, he just sort of broke the rules for me when he was writing Sandman. And so I said to myself, what do I have to do to make something that's out of that field? But yeah, anthropology always grounds me to the point where this society has to be realistic. These people have to have a function. I don't know if you read King for a Day, but I spent a lot of time just talking about the process of mining and what it meant to the community and why the valley was the way it was, simply because I had to build a real shire, a real community in that book. Otherwise, I couldn't wrap my own head around it. So yeah, anthropology, which I consider to be one of the purest sciences, and I realize people don't think of the soft sciences as sciences, but it really is, because everything we are as humans, we can study and look back at other animals and at primitive man, and we can say, oh, that's where that came from. That's why we're like the way we are.
Well, and I mean, like, my degree's in history, and I find something similar.
Right.
But I don't. But anthropology is not something I know an awful lot about. So sometimes, there are certain things that I would do that would be similar to the mining thing that you were talking about. Like, I can get sort of a little bit too focused maybe on the way that like certain trade goods operate in a setting and really think them through. I'm wondering though, because I don't know much about anthropology, what are some mistakes you see as somebody who does know about anthropology, people making when it comes to world building?
Nobody knows what the word culture means. Nobody in gaming knows what the word culture means, and it drives me nuts.
How would you define culture? What would be the
culture? Is a system of symbols and language and tools for survival. an elf being aloof or a dwarf being grim, that's not culture. That's actually kind of racist if you think about it for too long, but it really is just a personality type or a mannerism. And mannerisms are the final byproduct of culture. They aren't culture. So you have to have 1,000 things in place before you can say, and I'm going to use a real life example here. Before you can say Germans have a strong work ethic, you have to talk about 1,000 other things about Germans before you can get there. Because the work ethic is a byproduct of so many other things that are going on that go all the way back to Rome, that go all the way back to the only reason they survived for so long is because they refused to bend to Caesar. And that matters so much more than saying, well, they just work hard because they're efficient. Well, you're saying the same thing. That's not culture. That's a byproduct of culture. And so when I sit down and I make a game, and I have something called City of Mass, I keep going back to these other games that I'm making, where I'm on page 90 of the book, and I'm still writing about the culture of the society. I'm still talking about what makes the City of Mass unique. And I don't do that in everything I do, where I do 100 pages of culture. And this is going to go well over 100 when I'm done. But if I'm going to do it, if I want to sit down and really make an example of a book and say, well, your list of culture is nothing more than a few signifiers that you see from the outside. They have nothing to do with what it's like to live inside that culture. That's why when people play elves, they're just playing humans that are a little aloof, because they really can't get into the idea of an elf because nobody's actually ever sat down and written an elf properly.
So how deep do you think you need to go in terms of, because you said like there's like 1,000 things that you need to get to before you can get to the work ethic. In a role-playing game, like how deep would you want to go
I certainly wouldn't go that deep in a role-playing game because people can only maintain so much, but you at least need to give me something. There has to be some meat on that bone that explains where a society gets its joie de vivre, where a society gets, why is it that this culture developed this way, this culture developed this way, and they're right next door to each other? What is it that's lacking? And that usually starts with resources. That usually starts with tradition. That usually starts with religion. That usually starts with how the community gathers and what they consider important. It's a reflection of who has a voice and who doesn't. It's a reflection of, when they have to get up in the morning simply because there's no shade. And so they're up as soon as the sun is up. Those are signifiers that I've never seen ever addressed in a role-playing game about a culture. Those are way too, I think, fiddly, and nobody's going to care if all they want to do is pick up some dice and kill an orc.
Okay. Do you think then that there's just no appetite for it, or do you think?
I think there's an appetite for it. I just don't think people realize that they may want to know. I think a game master might want to know simply because it'll help inform how he or she approaches the material later. You were just talking about mining, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you may go too deep in mining when you're writing something up, but if the game master knows it and understands it, even if it never appears in the adventure or in the campaign, it gives them a sense of the depth to which they understand the society and which they can now present to the players. So they at least understand the foundation of it so that they can make better decisions about how they're running it.
Oh yeah, I would agree. I guess the challenge there is, like, I'll give an example. Like I found that knowing a lot about the imperial bureaucracy in China helped with my wuxia campaign. Because when my players wanted to go do something that involved that, I could react appropriately, and it would feel believable, and it allowed me to create kind of like a believable institution for them to explore. What I'm wondering is how much that was a real life thing. That was like you were saying, like there's like 1,000 things that you can kind of talk about before you even get to some of the surface level details.
Right.
For an RPG, do you think it's better to create that stuff on your own? Do you think it's better to rely on history and existing anthropology? Like, do you use analogs, for example, when you're making cultures, or do you prefer to take principles from anthropology and and start from scratch.
I think it's almost impossible to not create analogs, even if you're not intending to do it. You're still drawing upon what you know. But you have to understand the structure first. And I think you have to do it a lot before you can get good at it. I think you have to create a lot of societies from scratch in this way. I think Iorio Worlds was a great book for this, by the way. If anybody has ever seen this, go pick it up. And next time you're building a society, sit down and follow all their steps on how you build a society. But I think for me, I tend to steal even without planning to steal. I'm borrowing from ideas. I used to read Anthropology Today when I was in college, and there's so many societies I've forgotten the names of that I still remember the details about because the articles were so fascinating and they would walk you through why this certain African tribe doesn't like it when somebody's arrogant. And it would just be a couple of pages, but it would stick with me. And when you understand the why, it is much easier to do the what.
Okay. And just to bring this back around, because I originally had asked about what media inspired your design, and you mentioned anthropology, and I wanted to explore that only because I found it interesting when I had heard you talk about it in other podcasts and stuff. But but what kinds of movies and books and various forms of entertainment are serve as inspiration for you?
Well, I don't read genre fiction, and I think people find that sacrilegious that I don't. But I find it repetitive. I find it boring. I find it uncreative. I find that if you go back far enough, you'll see the guys that were the outliers and the women who were the outliers for all this, the progenitors for this sort of thing. And they wrote really good stuff. I think Frankenstein is a fantastic book.
Frankenstein's very good. I agree with that.
But I think every monster book that comes afterwards that doesn't know why it's being a monster book. Mary Shelley was a weird woman. She was a freak. And so you can see where her ideas came from if you understand why she's so weird. I think once you get 3 and 4 and 5 derivatives removed from the original material without understanding where the original material came from, genre fiction starts to get really dumb. And that hurts people's feelings when I say that, but I just don't like it.
Well, I mean, I like genre fiction, but I'm not bothered that you don't. It's
right.
It's not a.
But I think people tend to generally get upset when I say things like that. So I cannot turn to genre fiction for ideas. I don't get inspired by looking at it. Most often I'll be watching a movie or reading a book, and I'll get 10 minutes in, and immediately an idea for a game arises, or an idea for a challenge inside of a setting arises. A lot of my games just started with random words that popped in my head. And what is that? I've got a whole list. I've got pads and pads of paper here that are filled with ideas for milestones in Praxis, or adventure name titles, or just challenges and settings and things that I want to do that I probably won't get around to. But it's there. And anytime I'm short of an idea, I just turn to this pad of paper that I'm always writing on. And I remember writing down Stockholm Syndrome. What did I mean when I was typing that one time, or handwriting that one time? What was I going for? And that can trigger more ideas for me.
Now I'm just curious. Now with genre fiction, would you read like James Bond, for example, or would that be not? Would that's too much of a developed genre already at that point?
That's a tough one, because I think if you look at the movies are now become a parody of themselves.
Yeah.
I thought Skyfall was just absolute garbage. They had done this great job with the first two with Daniel Craig of showing you he's not the old Bond, and then they do Skyfall and they make him the old Bond again. And I just didn't see the point. It's the same problem I have with Episode 8, which is let us betray everything that we've been doing with this product. I'm not a Star Wars fan, so it doesn't offend me. I'm not one of those chest-beating nerds online who's screaming, "You ruined my characters." but from a writing standpoint, from a structural writing standpoint, it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
It's a bad idea. So if when you're doing things like that, and Star Wars sort of invents its own genre, it doesn't, but it does. James Bond sort of invents a genre, it does, but it doesn't. Eventually, those things become self-cannibalizing. They feed on themselves because their success. Sherlock Holmes did the same thing. The success of these products causes them to stop being original or evocative. They're just going back to what they know.
Well,
and so you can only read a couple of James Bond books before it becomes all the same thing.
Well, I mean, that's the inherent problem in genres. I mean, and James Bond's a good example because I just read Casino Royale for the first time. I'd never read the books. I'd seen the movies, but I never really bothered to read the books because I didn't see the point. And I recently said, hey, I'm going to read one of these James Bond books to see, if I like it, if it's different than the movies. I was surprised at how fresh it was, how it felt. It felt like a little bit more, shocking than the James Bond movies themselves. And it just, even the movie Casino Royale, the recent one, I found the book a little bit more shocking than the movie. And so I think, I sort of see what you're saying, and I've had conversations with people where one of the things that comes up in genre conversation all the time is, what are the boundaries of this genre? And the problem that kind of emerges once you do that is then you create these parameters that the genre has to abide by, and then there's no room for it to breathe anymore, and it kind of withers, as it sort of starts to stifle it, and then it withers, and then it becomes dull. So I could
it's that stricture. I use the word stricture a lot, and people think I'm trying to say structure, and they're not the same thing. There's the stricture that makes the genre what it is in the first place, and that's why it succeeds. But then that stricture ends up also strangulating the genre. So I think in order for any genre to really succeed, it has to have sort of an expiration date on it, a timestamp that says, okay, I'm only going to do 3 of these, or I'm only going to write this for 5 years. And then I've got to change it. Stephen King has had to reinvent himself many times because he knows he can't write Cujo again. He can't write Carrie again, right? His style of writing continues to change. And I don't like his endings, but my hat's off to Stephen King as being one of the best out there simply because he keeps finding new ways to tell essentially 10 different stories.
No, but he would be an example of a genre writer because he's a horror writer, right? So would you make an exception for something that you consider high quality? Is that
I think anybody that's above the genre, so to speak, because I think he's above it.
Okay.
Right. I think when he was starting out, when he was young, he was just following the steps. Mm-hmm. When he was writing the Bachman books, or when he was writing anything with Skeleton Crew, any of that old stuff, he was just following in the footsteps of Lovecraft a lot of the time, or he was following the footsteps of any of that schlocky 40s and 50s horror. But once he got his voice and he sat down and started writing big novels and he started writing bigger stories, I don't think there's anything like Christine ever. Christine it's a love story. It's not a horror story. If you look at it from the perspective of a love story, it is so much more terrifying than if you just look at it as straight.
Now, I haven't read
horror.
I have not read Christine. Does that follow the movie pretty much, or is the movie and the book different?
Well, it's been long enough that I could not. I've seen the movie so many times, I think it blurs the edges.
That's a problem. I have that same issue. You see a movie and then it corrupts your remembrance of the book.
I don't go back and read. Once I've seen a movie, I don't go back and read the book because I can't. Because I will only see. I saw the movie Rising Sun and then I read the book, and I could not see anyone else in the roles, and it made the book unfun for me.
Okay.
Because it was, I couldn't even when it was different, I couldn't enjoy that it was different.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
No, I can appreciate it. I kind of like doing that. I think I read The Godfather after I had seen the movies, And I couldn't imagine anybody else in those roles but the actors that were in the Godfather films.
Right, exactly.
But I enjoyed it. I didn't. It didn't bother me because it helped me to remember the characters, obviously,
right.
and
But when you're reading The Godfather, you're not seeing Sonny on the pages. You're seeing James Caan on the pages.
Yeah. Though I will say, Sonny, I did imagine a little bit differently, and I don't know why. But everybody else, it was pretty much the same person.
Right.
I think sometimes he had a way of describing characters that was pretty vivid too. So,
right.
But yeah, I don't know. I think that with movies and books, it's once you see something on the screen, it's very hard to take that out of your mind.
Right. And so to fully answer your question and to bring that all together, I tend to watch non-genre movies. I tend to read non-genre books because I want to be inspired by something that hasn't been run over with the tires a million times. Mm-hmm. I'll sit down and I'll watch a lot of Indian movies or a lot of Korean movies because they're thinking differently than we are. They're coming at culture differently than we are. They're coming at story structure differently than we are. So I can look at something and say, and I mentioned Sacred Games earlier. So far, the story's really boring. It's kind of the same old. But what makes it so good is the tone and the pacing and everything else. But I'll watch something like Memories of a Murder or Confessions of Murder or what's that? Old Boy, Lady Vengeance. Any of these amazing Korean movies that are coming out, and I think to myself, no one in America could make this film the way this was made right now. This is outside of our comfort zones. This is outside of how we think of story. And there's so much to learn by looking at what other people are doing. And I'll spend most of my time reading nonfiction, in fact, to get ideas rather than fiction.
Okay.
Because I'll read a book on Greg Graffin going down to South America to document bats and birds and spiders. And in that story, he'll talk about the government overthrow that happened while he was working. And that all of that together leads to, holy crap, what if you did a Call of Cthulhu adventure where the investigators are somewhere in South America or Central America, and now they have to flee. They can't even solve the problem of Cthulhu because the government's now hunting down any Westerners who are still in the country. In a 1940s kind of feel. It doesn't have to be South America, Central America. It could be Casablanca or wherever you want to set the setting, but any kind of place where the political environment could actually make the characters now have to deal with another problem, not just Cthulhu. Now you've written a story that Cthulhu's never done before.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
I think that's a great way to do things. I mean, I tend to get a lot of my inspiration from history. Like, I mean, I watch a lot of, like, I don't watch as many Korean movies as you, but I watch a lot of Chinese films and stuff like that for the same reason. But a lot of my inspiration comes from history because I don't know, I just find it more interesting than movies a lot of the time. And, and you can find it, like, just because it's a fantasy setting or just because it's set in, like, say, ancient Rome or whatever, doesn't mean you can't take inspiration from more current material. I had a period where I was really interested in the Khmer Rouge for some reason. I was reading a lot about the history of the Khmer Rouge, and that worked its way into my fantasy stuff that I was doing. That was just sort of, but it ended up being very interesting, at least to me.
Right.
So yeah, I think that sometimes I think people rely too heavily on things that we would label as sort of like entertainment or fiction, and don't bring enough other kinds of, like, nonfiction stuff to the table.
I think there's a lot of people who were raised on D&D, and people are going to get upset about this, and I don't care. There's a lot of people that are raised on D&D who believe it's somebody else's job to entertain them. And those people show up to the table, they shut off their brain, they don't really do a lot of creative thinking, and they just roll dice when they're told to. These people exist. You can get upset with me that I'm analyzing that they exist, but they exist. And I think what ends up happening is those people think that entertainment is just there for them to shut off their brain and let somebody else do the work. And those people are never going to come up with new, fresh ideas for D&D. They're never going to come up with the next new novel. They're never going to be the people that I would turn to for new ideas because they are okay with the regurgitation of old ideas. And those people probably aren't buying a lot of product. Those people probably aren't starting a lot of D&D campaigns. They're probably not game masters for the most part. And I kind of lost my thread now.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. Well, but so are you writing for game masters then? Is that really your target audience? Because I think that's a difference. I think there was a period where a lot of the industry looked like it was written for players rather than the game masters, and I did notice a dip in the quality of a lot of the material. So I don't know if you seem to be going maybe in that direction, but I'm not sure.
Well, I write a lot of GM-less role-playing games, as you know, and people call GM-less games for game masters, which I find kind of funny because you really have to have at least that itch that needs to be scratched to enjoy GM-less games. But I find myself writing for people that want the most out of the material, not necessarily game masters. So when you write for players, you're usually just writing up more stats. You're just writing up more tools. I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I think this is an important tangent. Third edition is awful, and not for any of the reasons that anybody says third edition is awful. So bear with me for just a second. Let me finish.
No, I'm interested. Thought. I'm interested in this thought.
Third edition breaks the social contract. It breaks the rules of how D&D is supposed to operate. And I don't know that anybody has said this before. But traditionally, and I think this is why people are going back to OSR, the game master is both responsible and has the authority. He or she is responsible for the story and the adventure, but also has the authority to make sure that those things happen. Third edition doesn't have that same tool. All of the authority went into the hands of the players. So the players, all the stats are in their favor, all the rules are written in their favor. Every feat is a way to break the rules so that the game master can't screw you, so to speak. And people loved that when it first came out because now I can kill dragons in 2 rounds and the game master can't come up with bullshit rules why I can't. Well, what it did, though, is it still put the authority in the player's hand, but it put the responsibility still remained in the game master's hands. So now the game master is responsible for getting all this work done without the authority to do it. And that's a job. That's what jobs feel like. That's not fun. That's not entertaining. And that simple decision to do that caused, eventually what happens with Pathfinder, which is 700 schlocky splat books, right, that choke the life out of Pathfinder that they now have to do a second edition because there's so much first edition material out there that it's not balanced. It doesn't work against one another.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you can balance a game like that. I have a somewhat complicated relationship with 3E, so I can sympathize with a lot of what you're saying. There are things about it I like, but there are things about it that I found that the culture of play changed dramatically when it hit the scene. And I would say it wasn't immediate. It was like 2 or 3 years in, I started to notice, oh wait, their expectations are totally different now. And so there was definitely something shifted. And I guess my mind thought that it was because before I remembered most of the material being written toward the game master with the aim of inspiring sparks of thought in the game. You would get a book and you might read the whole thing, you might not, but the aim of it was largely to kind of get you to start thinking in terms of this is what I want to do with vampires, or and then with 3E, a lot of the books were clearly written for the players because it makes sense in terms of business decision. Like there are more players than there are GM, but I think you're onto something that it might have had an effect on how people were playing, and also just with the way the system was structured, like you were saying, it's much more of it's more geared for like the rules lawyer type, where there's kind of an objective system, and the GM doesn't feel like he or she has as much authority within it. I remember getting that feeling as a GM, and I remember, like you said, it starting to feel like work at times. And so I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody went in with the plan of ruining the social contract. I don't think that was the objective. I just think that was the biggest side effect of, well, we need to make more rules. We need the feats. We need more stuff that feels like a CCG mechanic where the power is in the player's hands, so they feel like they can do more.
Yeah.
And that just led to more and more and more of that. If the game never had expansions and splat books, I don't think we would have felt the social contract break as quickly as it did. But yeah, you're right. We started playing it when it first came out. We loved it, but we didn't allow it to change how we thought about D&D. We still treated D&D like a game where I was coming up with stories and I was reacting to what the players were doing, and I've always played it a little differently. But the players' powers, so to speak, were to give them impact over the story, not necessarily to break the game every weekend.
Yep. Okay.
And I think that's what ends up happening when you have... I think it only takes about 5 or 6 books before any of the D&D or D&D clones start to fall apart. It doesn't take long.
Well, any system, again, I think if the GM has the authority to keep it all in check, it's much easier. But when that assumption isn't in place, I think anytime there's like an expansion of powers, and I'm guilty of this myself. I put out books that have new powers and stuff like that. But anytime that happens, there's just unforeseen consequences that you can't anticipate unless you like go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, and it reaches a certain point where you just know the company isn't able to vet everything against everything else. It would be an impossibility. So I think, I guess for me with 3E, what I found was, I was like you. I played 3E a lot. I played, I started on 1E, then cut my teeth on 2E, and then 3E came along, and I played that. But by the end, I was so tired. That's when I went back to the 1E DMG, and I went back to all the old school stuff, and I just needed something different. And I wanted to kind of get back to basics. But I did find the one thing that I liked 3E for more than anything, because of its high customizability, it served well when I ran a series of 3E Wuxia campaigns, and for that style of play, it seemed to work. I especially because I was only allowing certain aspects of the game to get into play. I kind of had to vet everything, and and a lot of it was under the because of the cultural considerations for the genre, but that also allowed me to make decisions based on the mechanics, and I think it ended up working better than it otherwise would. But,
and I think if you have a short list of this is what's available for this campaign, that's very different than, oh, you just spent 3 levels planning for that feat that I think is broken. Yeah, you can't use that way. That's going to lead to all kinds of arguments and decentivize the players to be invested anymore in what you're doing. If you can take away the thing I've been striving to get for the past 5 levels, and now it doesn't work the way I'd hoped that it would, okay, I don't even care anymore. And that's one of the places where arguments, I think, just flowed freely in 3rd edition, is because game masters couldn't master the material the way the players could. They had so many other things to consider.
It was the first time I felt like I had to master the system to an incredible degree. Like, you always were familiar with it as a GM, but that was when I had to sit down and study the books in a way that I had never really done before. And that was the only way for me to gain control of my campaign, as I recall, at that time. And that was just the culture of play. Like, you could fight it if you wanted to. You could sort of assert your authority as GM, but people would just think you were being a jerk. And so it was.
They certainly couldn't have seen why you were making the decisions you were making.
Yeah. So it was definitely the system mastery. And if you did master that system, I will say it was workable, but you really had to master it, and that was a big hurdle. And prior to me mastering it, it was a nightmare. It was just a slog getting the campaign to function how I thought a campaign ought to function was very difficult. But anyways, we should probably get back to some other topics. I don't want to go too deep into the 3E tangent, but One thing I wanted to talk about before you go is your focus on graphic design and layout. I hear you talk about it a lot, so I know that this is something that is important to you.
Yeah.
But I just if you could talk a little bit about the visual style of your books and RPG books in general.
I think modern books just look so bad. I just picked up I bought the books. They actually came in the mail. I bought 2 books off of DriveThruRPG, and I bought them based on the titles and the covers. They just looked evocative, and I crack them open, and the interior is just dead. Mm-hmm. It's immediately dead to me, and it makes reading the books work. And I think one of the things that people don't understand is that these are both toolboxes, because you have to reference them later for play, and they need to be fun. And the most important rule you need in graphic design is keeping my eye on the page. Mm-hmm. You can't expect the text itself to do that. We read way too many books now. We read way too much stuff online. Our eyes get bored really, really quickly now. And if a book doesn't look fun, if it doesn't look structured, if it doesn't look functional, people are going to tune out. And I have different ways that I do different things. My protocol series is very boring to look at because I'm trying to save you printer toner, because you have to print out so many of those charts for when you're playing at the table. But the books are also very short, and I don't really expect the graphic design to do what I would expect the graphic design to do, to say, for something like the Forgotten Realms.
Okay.
The third edition Forgotten Realms was gorgeous, but at the same time was also only semi-functional. Those headers were way too small and too faint, so it was hard to find the material you wanted later. So you have to marry those 2 functions of being pretty and keeping my eye on the page. I'm sorry, not just 2, 3 functions, while also making sure it's easy to reference later. And if you're not thinking about those things, then you're just putting text down.
And what would you say are, because I mean, obviously this is an industry where a lot of people are sort of learning as they go. Like I've definitely experienced that myself, where if I look at my earlier books, they're not quite nearly where things are now. What would you recommend to people? Like if somebody's like, hey, I do want to step up my game.
First of all, stop looking at other products for ideas, right? The majority of what is out there is just a rehash of what came out last year. So the derivative of a derivative of a derivative. Remember the old audio cassette tapes? We would record, and you would record off a recording, off a recording, off a recording. Eventually, you lose the mastery of the sound, and it's not any good anymore. You have to be looking at what other people are doing. You have to be making conscientious decisions about why you're making something look the way it is. I just did the graphic design on Sigmata for Chad Walker, and he knew he wanted it to look like an 80s book. And by doing an 80s book, that meant it needed to look a little sloppy. It needed to feel a little disjointed, because graphic design in the 80s wasn't as, it didn't have the function that it should have had. It was more form than anything else. So I knew I wanted ragged text. I knew I wanted these busy sidebars. I knew I wanted the book to feel kind of claustrophobic. And those were decisions I had to think about. Those are things I had to think about in order to make the proper decisions of how to design the book. And then I just used fonts that people were familiar with, that were kind of dated, so that would be more comfortable. That would be the comfortable part of the book, so that they could at least get through the material without being yanked out of the setting altogether.
And are there any, I don't know, like resources or guidebooks that you'd point people to for, just...
There's a woman named Robin Williams. She writes the non-designer's design book. That's the number one everybody should have. Mm-hmm. And then any of the index books by Krause. I think it's Chris Krause. Jim Krause. Any of the index books. He does one called Layout Index. It's really probably the only one people need. Or Idea Index. He does a basic design index. It's a great series. And it's got lots of examples and pretty pictures. So you're not even having to read a lot. You're just getting inspired by what's in there. And I would look at any kind of modernist or postmodernist magazines that are out there, like Raygun. You'll just see how people attempt to solve problems on the page with typography. Mm-hmm. I love Joseph Goodman. I've got a disclaimer here. I have to have a disclaimer here. I love Joseph Goodman. I love Goodman Games. I love DCC. That is some of the worst graphic design on the inside I've ever seen. There's way too much art. People generally don't have that kind of budget for art, and I think he just went nuts. There are spreads where there are 4 pieces of art on one spread, and that is just too much. It is just too busy. I think that book would be a half the size if he'd used his typography better and had less art in there. And I think his situation is unique. I think generally people don't have enough money for art, and they make poor decisions with their typography and their layout because they think they have to compensate for lack of art. I would suggest making sure that you always have good art, having less art if necessary, if you can't afford it, and just focus on presenting the material in a way that it's fun to read and easy to read. It has to be those two things.
Well, I mean, cost is definitely a factor, and I think you can swing both ways, like you're saying, because I've been on both sides of it, where I've had, a poverty of budget for art, and then I've had too much money for art, frankly, at times, right. and you can make bad decisions from that too, because you're so, wow, I got all this art now. So I mean, in your opinion, what's the ideal approach there in terms of balancing the quantity of it?
Well, I think quality over quantity. Mm-hmm. I think even one piece of bad art can ruin a book for you. I cannot wait to redo King for a Day because I have finally ordered some good art for it. I didn't have an art budget for it the first time around. So I grabbed all this free stuff, and I made a bunch of little squigglies and lines and just chapter breaks and whatnot. And I think it would just be better with no art at all than some of that bad stuff that's in there. You can tell some of it was photos. And those are just poor decisions I made on the fly. I make mistakes. I'm not without sin, but when I'm giving people feedback on graphic design, I'm doing it from an outsider's perspective of I wasn't in your shoes at the time. I can tell you what went wrong here. I didn't have that same clarity when I was doing it myself, so it's real easy to make these mistakes. I don't think anybody should take it personally.
No, it's total. I mean, it's very easy. That's why I'm finding this topic fascinating, because I like what you're saying, because like like something like the one bad piece of art affecting, and it's not necessarily a bad piece of art. I made a book once where the art was fine and the maps were fine, but there were like 5 or 6 maps and pieces of art that didn't match the book because of my art direction. And I had to make a decision. Do I just it turned out to be a better decision to get rid of those pieces than to keep them in, even though they were actually functional. So I had to delay the book and get them redone. And it was like, it was annoying because it was a boneheaded mistake, but it's so easy because you just think, oh, it would be really cool to do this image in this style, and you might not, if you're not being disciplined enough about, okay, but all the other images, you need to think about all the other images, and you need to think about all these other aspects of it. But I think that's something that people pick up over time. But when you talk about this subject, I like to listen, because I think that you when I look at your books, the visual style is very clear, and it's very effective. And so I think that if you said those things and your books look like crap, it wouldn't mean anything. But because your books look so good, it's okay. I should probably pay attention to what this guy has to say.
Right. I think people have gotten to it. One of the things I cannot stand, and I wish would go away, is the yellow paper background. That has got to go from all of these third-party D&D ripoffs. And to go in the other direction, the old school look has got to go too, where people are using Cooper font and they're using all this, and there's nothing on the page. It's just bad typography and bad chapter breaks. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody do a header within the bottom 1 inch of a page, and I'm breaking up how I'm looking. If you're listening and you're going to graphic design a book, read up on what widows and orphans are. Please learn what a widow and an orphan are in graphic design and stop doing it. Stop following some of these bad trends that hurt people's eyes. There's just so many things I see going on, and it occurs to me when I'm looking at it that these people they're trying so hard to look professional that they're missing the detail of, is this even in the right place? Is this art in the right place? I just had 3 pieces of art in the last 5 pages. Do I really need another one right now? Or can their eye take a break on this spread with just text? Things like that. If you don't have enough art, you need to figure out how to space it. It's called dummying up a book. You need to learn how to dummy up a book so that the flow has its own sort of cadence and language. So, okay, it's been 3 pages or 4 pages since I saw a piece of art. I should expect one on the next page.
Yep.
And that, even if they don't know it consciously, their brain knows it subconsciously, and it creates a comfort when they're reading the book that they know something is coming, and that's going to help break up what they're reading through.
Well,
and if it looks like an encyclopedia and it's nothing but an encyclopedia, like my shitty King for a Day, then that's okay, because at least it's consistently looking like an encyclopedia. World's Largest Dungeon didn't have a lot of art, not because we couldn't afford it, but because it was 1 million words. If we'd added more words to that, more art to that thing, it was already 840 pages. How much longer would that book have been? At a certain point, the decision to just make it look like an encyclopedia was to aid in reference and to keep the book from going to 1,000 pages.
No, that's a big issue. The word count thing has a huge impact on that sort of thing. And,
yeah,
it's something I think people don't realize. Like, because one of these things you often see repeated in the gaming community is people think that that writers will like deliberately increase the word count to make more money, but I don't. Normally, it's the opposite problem. Do you know what I mean? Normally, it's that you're given like a cutoff point, and you're trying to stay within that cutoff point because of things like page consideration. Unless you're really struggling to get to the get to the whatever the bare minimum needs to be. But yeah, I think I don't know that's with stuff like widows and orphans. That's pretty easily managed now with InDesign too, because you can just turn a setting on there that'll prevent that from even happening. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, but you do have to be careful with any automated process on a software like that, because it can screw you over. I use
an old version of InDesign, and I don't think a lot of people have access to InDesign. A lot of these people are laying out their books in Word, which they should stop doing, or they're downloading some free software somewhere that emulates what InDesign does, or they're using Quark because they're engineers and it came free with work. I think you still have to do a lot of the processes yourself, because I think if I left it up to the computer to decide when there's a widow or an orphan, I'm going to get hyphenated words where I don't want them. I'm going to get tracking problems where I don't want them. And if you notice, my books are all left aligned. They're not justified. And that's because I like maintaining a consistent tracking and kerning through the words. It makes it easier on the reader's eyes. And it's because my books tend to be a little more word dense than art dense. I also want them knowing where the lines are ending, so that it's easier for them to rag around. And these are all things you learn over time through graphic design. There's decisions, there's rules for a reason, so you know why you're making the decisions you're making, to either follow them or break them. And people that don't know the rules of graphic design end up just turning out something that looks like the last bad book they looked at, because they think that book was right. Yeah, so we're back to go look at these reference books I'm talking about. Look at Raygun Magazine. Look at, I don't know, there's one called Bolt, I think. There's a bunch. When you go to Barnes & Noble, there's a whole wall of postmodernist magazines. Just buy one.
Well, and kind of what you're saying ties back to the genre thing. You're really saying, like, don't stick just to, like, the genre. Stick to either the things that originate it, the really standout elements, and things outside the genre that are good. You know, because I think the problem you're describing of everything looking like a derivative of of the Free E-Player's Handbook, for example, is a product of that kind of consumption, maybe. But yeah, so we've been going on for like an hour and 15 minutes, so I'm going to let you go.
Yeah. I can talk all day.
Yeah. But before we go, how is the Kickstarter doing? And, you know, what's any news on where things are going with it?
Well, in the middle of the night, we hit 100 backers in one day. So I don't think I've ever done that well before with number of backers. For money on a day one than this. But I'm impressed so far with how well it's doing. Simply because I never know with this kind of thing. I don't interact on forums. I don't go to RPGNet. I don't go to EN World. So I don't have an audience for OSR products because it's not what I normally make. Mm-hmm. So the fact that people are even interested who would normally buy my indie style stuff or my progressive stuff, that's impressive to me. I'm excited. I'm excited for the very fact that whenever I make something, I just want to know that people are having fun with it because I'm making it for me. I'm not making it for them.
Well, and I think. So, go ahead.
If somebody else is having fun with it, that's great. I didn't have much there. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I think the OSR is sort of getting into other communities. Do you know what I mean? It seems like it's being interpreted in different sectors of the gaming hobby online. And in new ways. So I'll occasionally see, like, you know, I wouldn't think of a place like there's a forum called storygames.com. I wouldn't think of them as an OSR forum, but I've noticed a lot more OSR conversations going on there.
Yeah.
And it's through the prism, you know, of a story game community, I think, but it still is having that impact. And so, you know, I think but what I'm wondering is, do you think that the success of the Kickstarter was OSR people coming to the game because of the OSR, or people that are already into the indie thing maybe and coming to it because they're curious about the OSR?
I don't know. There's a lot of new customers on this one already. Mm-hmm. I'm getting the kind of questions. I don't get a lot of questions on my Kickstarters anymore. People know who I am. Mm-hmm. They know the kind of books I put out. They know what kind of deadline to expect, what kind of quality to expect. They know I'm always going to be a little late, but they know they're going to get their product and they're going to get a nice book, or they're going to get whatever they're going to get. I think with something like this, I'm getting new customers now who are asking the kind of questions I never get, which is, well, why is your shipping to Australia so high? Because it's really effing expensive to ship to Australia, and I've been screwed before, so I have to pad the shipping price. I'm not going to have a conversation with you in public about that. I want the Kickstarter to be fun. I don't want it to be a spreadsheet analysis and a conversation about how I project manage. I had some guy ask me, well, if the art's already done, why are you Kickstarting this? Well, you want me to have a conversation with you in public about my marketing strategies? Because I think that's what answer are you expecting? I think these kind of customers have gotten so used to asking questions and getting them answered. I don't think they even know why they're asking them anymore. They're just asking them because it satisfies an itch.
The shipping thing is interesting too, because I think people don't understand, like, nobody's happy with the shipping costs. Like the publishers aren't happy, the sellers aren't. Nobody likes the shipping cost. It affects everybody.
Here, I'm going to tell you right now, for all your listeners, this is why my shipping costs are higher than you might expect. And I don't even think they're necessarily higher than other people, but they're high. This is why they're higher than you might expect. First, the top 10% of that shipping cost goes right to Kickstarter. There's nothing I can do about that. So I have to charge you 10% more for that shipping than I normally would have to. I have to pay taxes now on how that shipping cost works because of how I get my taxes done at the end of the year with Kickstarter's new payout system. So I have to add another 20% for that to the shipping cost. I have to cover my butt if I'm shipping overseas to someplace like South Africa or to Brazil, because they have corrupt post offices that often lose product, and then I have to pay and ship it again to you. And so there's a little bit of insurance that I have to charge on that shipping cost in those places. There are factors that go into this. And the most important one, I don't know if the U.S. Postal Service is going to raise their rates between now and the 6 months when the book ships.
Well, those kind of things. Go ahead.
Those are all real problems that, if I talk about them online, pulls you out of the project.
Yeah.
They're not fun to talk about. Nobody wants to have that conversation. Some guy got mad at me. I've been working on the $1 Kickstarter for about 2 years. It's been a project in the background. And some guy was chewing my ass out that I've been unprofessional about it. And I've handed them $23 worth of free PDFs for $1. I've been giving constant updates, and I keep updating the PDF as I write it. It's up to 90 pages now for $1. This is $1 Kickstarter. And some guy chewed my ass out on the page. And I had to pull myself out of the fun of the page, stop talking in the voice that I've been using, and I now have to talk to you like a child and walk you through why this project has taken so long.
Yeah, the margins are so thin that if you're not like Wizards of the Coast or something, like maybe
right.
if you're not Wizards of the Coast, or I don't know, if you're not Paizo or something, you're just it's incredibly difficult. So that's why a lot of times these books are higher priced. It's just a reality. I haven't done a $1 product, but I've done the 50-cent thing, which is very difficult to pull off. And that's thankfully I didn't. Most people were grateful that I put that much work into a 50-cent product. But
was it on Kickstarter or was it?
No. This was on RPG Now, so I wasn't dealing with Kickstarters. I would imagine that I haven't done Kickstarter, and the reason why is I don't want to feel like I have 100 bosses, and I felt like that's how. I mean, maybe that's not what it's like, but that's what I thought it would be like. So,
yeah, no, that's not what it's like.
Okay. But I just didn't want to be responsible to the, you know what I mean? I want to I wanted to be able to make what I wanted to make, and if people didn't like it, that's fine. But I didn't want the people to already have bought it and then be mad that it didn't come out the way they wanted.
Right.
So,
that's certainly the risk you take with it, but that's still a risk you take with anything. I just bought those 2 books on Drive-Thru-RPG, and I guess if I'd looked at the PDF before I purchased, I would have known that they were so ugly on the inside. But I still wanted to get them. I still wanted to see what their worlds were about. I wanted to see how they approached the mechanics. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that they were both a waste of money. But I also am a big supporter of the hobby. So if I have a couple of bucks sitting on Drive-Thru because of my sales, I'm happy to support somebody's dream. And I think that the same thing is true of Kickstarter. People that want to support people use Kickstarter, and people that just want what they want, they're going to go pirate a book anyway. So the model I'm using and the amount of bosses, quote unquote bosses I have, I shouldn't be affected by the quality I produce simply because I'm taking the money ahead of time instead of on the back end.
But yeah, I don't know. I just don't know if I could deal with the pressure of all that. That would be. It seems like
you get used to it. This is my 20th Kickstarter, I think.
Okay.
The first day is always the most fun, and the middle of it is always arduous.
Well, and it sounds. I don't think you haven't had too many missteps. It sounds like too, because I mean there are some really notorious examples in the RPG community of disastrous.
Well, I'm never going to screw anybody. I've been doing this too long, right?
Okay.
I'm way too honest about this. I'm not cheating anybody. I'm merely. If I told you how little I make doing this, you would wonder why I spend so many hours. I should be working at Starbucks. The amount of hours I put in doing this for so little reward, but I like what I do. And if people don't come back and get a second product from me, it's because we're a bad fit. I don't take it personally if somebody doesn't like the material I'm producing. I know what I'm good at and I know what I suck at. And so you're buying a Jim Pinto product. You're not buying a Paizo product when you back one of my projects.
Yeah, that's a good attitude to have. That's a good attitude to have. I have a similar approach where, if my dad is a sales trainer, and his whole thing was about, connecting customers with the product that fits them. Do you know what I mean? And so if my game's not a fit for you, it's not a big deal. And I'm happy to help direct you to a better game for your needs. But I want people buying games that want to buy them. So I think that's the right attitude. Now, so again, the game is called Bloodwraith, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, Bloodwraith.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's on. It's kickstarting now. How long is the Kickstarter going for?
It's a quick starter. What I'm calling a quick starter because it's only 15 days total. So it's day one is already over, and so it'll only go 14 more days. I think first week of October is when it ends. So
okay. All right.
Not a lot of time to back this one.
So I'll put a link down below. And if you don't see the link, Jim, just remind me. But I generally try to stay on top of these things. And yeah, so it was great having you on. I'm sorry I took you for so long. We've been going for an hour and 30 minutes.
I like doing this. This is fun to me.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no, I figured you might like to talk based on what I've heard.
I actually do. It's one of the things I don't like about myself, right? Is how much I talk. But I think a lot of that is working from home by myself, and I can go all day without saying a word. So my voice cracks when my wife comes home because I've gone the entire day without talking.
Uh-huh.
So there's already some gravel in my voice because I talked so much today with you. This is more than I'll talk in 3 days.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that I could help. Yeah. No. It's great. I'd much rather have somebody on who likes to talk than somebody who doesn't. That's it's like pulling teeth. So
yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, we'll let Jim go and check out the Kickstarter. It's called Bloodwraith, and I'll be back on tomorrow with Wuxia Weekend, where we're going to cover a Kara Hui movie. And until then, we'll talk to you later.